interrupting you mid-sentence in the dramatic role-play conversations. I hate
It
to
is
do
pretty
that.
dramatic over here.
The sinful tendencies of human beings.
Through tears, I'm sorry. You have a question. I want to hear about your process. What did you experience?
This is really hard, so we don't even get into it, but Making America Great, again, from presidency is what we picked. And I just, I want to know where are the balances in continuing to respect and honor the person that wants to talk about that specific conversation topic, and then also us deflecting and trying to get to the core and the bottom and ask questions that make that person want to talk about that again. Does that make sense?
So you've entered, they're already having that conversation, you're wondering how do you change the conversation?
This is what they
how
want
do
to
you-
talk about.
Yeah.
This is the question they want. This is the conversation they want to talk about. You know, how far do we stay in this, and then try to take it to.
Because the goal is not an argument, you know, you're not tit for tat, you know, so
Right.
you say that, I say this, I mean,
Yeah,
that's not.
it's not a winning over or a resolution. I think it's more in the empathy that Cheryl had brought in as far as listening and understanding how they experience this. Help me understand and what has been your experience. What are your fears? What are your excitements? What are your how do you feel? Do you feel safer? Do you feel unsafe? How are your friends experiencing this? How's it impacting us? Because it's impacting everyone. And to avoid it, I think we tend to avoid these hot topic conversations. Yet they're reflective of the collective humanity of what we're experiencing in our culture. And if we don't engage in it, then they're presuming who you are as a Wes or a Sean and what your stance is by your silence. And it doesn't mean you compromise or that you enter in and you make an issue of your political views above Christ, which is happening in so many situations. People are taking a political stance, and then that is then reflecting in people's desire to even enter into faith conversations because you've predetermined where you are politically, and that's it. We certainly don't want that to be a determining factor.
What if they ask you, what do you think about that? I mean, answers.
You're also a human being.
Yes.
Yeah, so you can answer and to have that dialogue. And as we'll discuss on some of the problem is that we're not able to reason and discuss or to disagree with others. And in Acts, when Paul went into the city, he ministered into the temple, and then he went into the streets and he reasoned with the people that were there. And it's a matter of just having reasonable conversation, realizing that everyone isn't made up of the same fabric I'm made up of my worldview or my thought process, but I'm intrigued by the value of what someone else brings to the table and what their posture is and what their stance is, and how do we learn and grow, as opposed to camping out on our sides and entering in. What are some other? It's a difficult exercise, and I would commend you all either in doing this later in the process, but you entered into the conversations more quickly than we've experienced at other workshops. There's more confusion on this, but it's difficult to enter in or to even to role play. What are some of the other things that you experienced in this exercise?
Well, we actually didn't stay on topic very long. We had trouble playing roles, but I picked sexual harassment scandals and the rise of the Me Too campaign.
Go figure.
But it quickly became sort of a gender role discussion. And primarily steered by the church to become a gender role discussion, not primarily steered by our Explorer, which, I don't know, I was just thinking sociologically kind of what happens when Christians get into the conversation. We're gonna shift it off of the topic to where we want this to be, where we can play.
And where you end a conversation doesn't necessarily reflect where you're just following a conversation and a thought process and back and forth as a relationship, as opposed to just camping. So it's very normal to how, even on all these topics, even, you know, if I pick one of these up, it's the tariffs and the financial instability, and they're all Trump related, you know, well, because that's what the topic of Trump, but there were secondary topics that came up with that as well. So we need to have the ability to transfer to different conversations. The exercise is there is to help us. We talk like a real person, have a conversation like a real person, and not follow the conversation and not your agenda. And the conversation spoke up into all different areas.
Yeah, we didn't get to do this very long, but we chose the what do you do for a living because we were going to be anti-dogmatic and we're all on that street.
Yes.
So, but in the short time we had, it was cool when Christy was asking, like, what is spirituality? What is that? What is discipleship? You know, it was cool because the moment I'm like, okay, don't think Christian-y words, so don't use more Christian-y words when you answer, you know, and like, okay, well, it's like a relationship, you know, what do you think? And then I kept thinking, I want to like take it back to her, like, what do you think about this? What do you think about this? So reflective listening, asking back.
Yeah.
And we didn't get very far, but it was good. It was hard in one moment, like, don't use more Christian-y words. I don't know the Christian-y words.
I'd like to know what people would say to that, because I was asked that by a woman. She said, what do you believe about spirituality? I said, for me, it's a relationship with the person, Jesus. She goes, I'm not talking about Christianity, I'm talking about spirituality. So I'm like, I didn't know, but we ended up kind of switching the subject and talking about other things, but it's very important that we can answer that. But even just saying, I feel like it's a relationship with the person of Jesus, she was very like that, oh, you're a Christian.
Therefore, then you, because of the wall that has the misconceptions, it's irrelevant and you're not authentic, she has placed that label on you. How do you loosen the brakes in that situation? What would be something Joe might say in response to an anti-dogmatic that even if Jesus or Christianity or church was a part of this, the conversation's over? How
So
do you?
she asked you about spirituality?
She said, what's your definition of spirituality? I said, it's a relationship for me. I said, for me, it's a relationship with Jesus. So I should have said, I see spirituality as people seeking something beyond themselves. I should have kept it maybe more
No, but the thing is, she asked what it was for you.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think you could just say, well, you know, since you addressed that to me, that's how I would answer that. You might
Yeah.
answer it differently.
And if her response was,
Yeah, like, what would you say spirituality is for you?
yeah, and if she came back hostile to your definition, that just gives you an opportunity to ask why and get into her story. Like, why would,
Yeah,
why are you so offended by Christ? Or why does my definition of spirituality, why is that so troubling to you? And let them speak. It would be,
I knew she was very much in the New Age and
you know,
very strong in yoga, everything behind it. That's why she reacted so strong. I figured that out right after that because she kind of revealed her spirituality.
I think if, as ministers of the gospel, as people vocationally who are engaging in this, it's maybe more difficult for us because the echo chamber we live in or the relational sphere of other people that we work with and spend the majority of our time with. But I also think that we're making some assumptions of our members of our churches and of our organizations, is that they know people that aren't followers of Christ and that they're engaging with them and know how to have conversations. So without being too elementary in the process, I think we need to come up with some solutions of how do we help people talk like a real person. And even how Neil had said in the video at the very beginning, it seems like your goal is that everyone would come to Christ and that every conversation will lead to that. And that is success. He goes, but that's not the real world. Not everyone's going to fall into line with what you want to do. The conversations don't stay on the same page. They veer off. So how do we create these invigorating environments of conversation and discourse and reasoning among those that we coach, mentor, disciple, and it's helping them think how, Christy, placing yourself in your friend's shoes, how would they respond, and what is my posture, and what's my approach with them? So you all have your 7 cards, and you have names on them. Some of mine have multiple names, and some of them have individual names. But in wrapping this up, I wanted to share with you this 7 people in my life that represent each one of these personas. And so as hopefully it'll drill it home a little bit more on the need to have these relationships and the fact that these people are real. I'm going to start on this end of the spectrum, and the anti-dogmatic in my life is a gentleman by the name of Joe. And Joe is married to Michael after a committed relationship. He's been with Michael for 20 years, but because of the marriage laws changing, they moved into a marriage relationship. And my kids know Joe, they know Michael. Politically, they are as extreme as you could possibly be, completely embraces the anti-dogmatic. Was someone that would go door to door in other states to campaign for his political party, not knowing the candidates, but just very, very politically passionate. And his Facebook feed is filled with political statements. In fact, he's so anti-dogmatic that recently I have one of his Facebook posts that he wrote to his niece on Facebook publicly for everyone to see. And his niece was a Trump supporter and was wondering why everyone was bashing Trump. And she wasn't as adamantly Trump as he was anti-Trump, but still in different camps. So he saw her post and wrote a comment on her feed, and I actually have a photo of the comment. Joe wrote, "Sorry, but I'm going to unfriend you. Your views on truth do not coincide with mine, and I must stand up to ignorance and hate. Talk to me, if needed, through your mom," which is his sister. This is his niece. Feels very passionately. "This is my first time unfriending. Donald Trump is a sexist and misogynist, and your husband should recognize this in case you do not. Wake up. See you in 4 years when reality comes back to bite you in the whatever." Quote unquote, Donald's words to Megyn on Fox News, in case you forgot. Ciao. So this is Joe, and how do I love Joe and who he is and all that he brings to the table. He's the anti-dogmatic in my life, and it's a great prayer card, for me, how to engage in a relationship. The comfortable person in my life is another gentleman named Dave, and he's been married to Sandy for 23 years. I was the best man in his wedding. And actually, he was the best man at my wedding. It was his second wedding, and I did the eulogy at his wedding. But he didn't want there to be any strong religious components whatsoever. So I chose in Colossians on how to love one another and bearing with one another, and kind of the correlation of the fruits of the Spirit that are listed in Colossians and right relationships and so forth. But he's the calm water guy, never wants to create any ripples, doesn't ever want to have political or religious conversations, and he's the middle child, agree with everyone on all sides, but don't rock my boat, and let's keep everything calm and normal and not enter into anything. And he's very, very content, very complacent, very comfortable with where he's at. Then the next person is anxious in my life. Her name is Virginia. She's been married to Brian for 30 years, and they live in separate parts of the home. It's a financial arrangement right now for the marriage. They have 2 children. She's on antidepressant medication, and I'm the person she calls when she's off on her medication. Call for prayer and have deep conversations, but she's completely anxious and wonders, how am I going to get my next job? How's the next paycheck going to be made? Are my meds correct? And just dealing with anxiety and peace issues within her life. And she's about, I think she's 63 years old. Then the explorer happens to be Virginia's child, her second child, who I've known as her whole life as Tira, and recently she's decided to become TJ and is transitioning, gender transition. And TJ is a college graduate, works for Teach for America. Follow TJ on Instagram, a compelling life, engaged in just great relationships with her friends and her community. It's very different than mine. But TJ is exploring religion, meaning for life, goes to a Unitarian church, was raised up and going to church youth retreats, the Unitarian or Unity Church, and just exploring, and is open to a lot of different aspects and very engaging personally. The vast difference in people in our social networks. The next person who's disillusioned is Laura. And when I was 15, Laura was walking with Christ and led me to Christ. Shared the gospel with me after coming home from college. And it was very clear to me that God loved me, that I was separated from God, that He desired to have a relationship with me. I was seeking God's approval, but I just needed to receive that through the free gift of salvation through Christ. And so, on August day, 1980, when I was 15 years old, my good friend Laura led me to Christ. Since then, she's in her third marriage, was in an abusive relationship initially, got pregnant, her husband abused drugs and abused her, she was divorced, and blamed God for everything. Blamed the church, blamed the institution, has been on every set of the spectrum. Second marriage, her husband died of an untimely heart attack, and now she's in her third marriage with a gentleman. It's his first marriage, and they have really a great marriage. They live in Naples, Florida, and she's still kind of burned spiritually, but sometimes would identify as a Christian and sometimes wouldn't. She's disillusioned and hurt by the church. The next person is Joan, and Joan is an inquisitive follower who came to Christ through a New Age weekend retreat. It's a crazy, crazy story. But she went to this retreat, was invited, and met a charismatic Catholic there that came to these retreats to witness and to share with people about Jesus. Heard about Jesus at this New Age retreat 20 years ago, came to faith in Christ. I was at an evangelism training seminar with her shortly after that, and I was so confused by her story and not convinced that this could possibly happen. At the end of the evangelism training that she participated in for 2 days, she went forward to the trainer and said, "Well, that's the decision I made." I said, "No, it couldn't have been. It couldn't have been," and it was. And ever since then, she has been following Christ to the best of her ability, and still wonders on some areas, and is a faithful church member and a minister in the children's ministry at church, but just has some questions, isn't completely, totally grounded in her faith. But she would call herself a follower of Christ and is still exploring what that looks like for her. Lastly, is the faithful, is a guy named Mike, who came to Christ after being in a relationship, an affair with a woman that lived above him. That he was renting a basement apartment, and he was having an affair with the renter's wife upstairs. They found out, beat him up, and he said, "My life has fallen apart." 30 years ago, was an alcoholic, came to Christ, life pulled together, absolutely transformational, is now on mission to reach out to other 18 to 22-year-old men who are in AA programs, mentors them, coaches them, gets them involved in the community. But as a follower of Christ, sees his life as being intentional and being missional every step of the way, every breath that he takes. So that's my social network. So imagine this table right here was full, and it was Joe and Dave and Virginia and TJ and Laura and Joan and Mike. All 7 personas sitting together. What do you imagine that conversation might look like? They might be talking about me. Well, we had that opportunity to all have dinner together last Thanksgiving, because it's my family. Joe is my older brother. Then my brother Dave was the best man in my wedding, and I performed the wedding for him, the comfortable. My sister Virginia is the anxious. Her daughter Tira, is Anna's cousin. Then disillusioned is my sister Laura, who led me to Christ. My mother, who came to faith at a New Age conference. Joan is the inquisitive follower. And my closest brother in age to me, Mike, had come to Christ about 25 years ago. And so that's my family. Pretty interesting. Let me give you a little bit of a follow-up. Since that lunch in November, as we entered into, we did our first roadshow in November, and I kind of introduced the people in Denver to my family who we were yet to have dinner together. I'm the youngest of 8. There's more members of my family that fall in the line here as well. But my brother Joe had us over for dinner in Chicago. We spent the week in Chicago for Thanksgiving. 5 daughters, my wife, we all went up to his apartment on Lakeshore Drive, right on the Gold Coast in Chicago. It was very successful. And he had lunch for us. And as we were leaving for lunch and getting on the bus, he texted me. He said, Tom, actually they call me Tommy. There's still Tommy in my family. He says, I really wish you lived closer because I love your family. I thought, okay. We entered in to where we needed to enter in and had a great lunch with my brother Joe. We continue to do that. My brother Dave was at that Thanksgiving dinner party, and everything is still smooth waters. Really no progress in that relationship. My sister Virginia, as I stated, is the one that's always calling me to ask for prayer and for crisis and what do I do next. And when it comes to a point of fear and desperation, I want to be there. I want to pray for her and be available. Her child, TJ, we had breakfast with them at a diner in Chicago before Thanksgiving because we kind of wanted to hit our family individually before we're all together. But as we were preparing for this breakfast, and our daughters have known Tira as their cousin their whole life, and now Tira is transitioning to TJ. And it was incredible as we had breakfast at this diner in Chicago. And Susan and I, my wife and I, were just nervous. How is this going to work out? How is this going to transition? How is the conversation going to go? Our daughters just said afterwards, as we were trying to prepare them, they were much more prepared than we were because they saw TJ as their cousin, as a person. So we've always loved TJ. Now we kind of have to go through a new grid of thinking, what does that look like? But the conversation was so natural. It was so enjoyable, asking about what she does with Teach for America, what she's learning. We didn't talk about any of the technicalities or the realities of what she's struggling with in her life and how he's becoming TJ and what that looks like. But we just loved TJ and Virginia as that breakfast appointment. So it was a real witness. My children were a witness to us as to how to love the Imago Dei that was present in TJ at that opportunity. My sister Laura, who led me to Christ, has been all over the spectrum on her spiritual journey, and never really know where that she led me to Christ. Had claimed to been a follower of Christ. She's hit every end of the spectrum. Plants talk to her, reincarnation, the whole everything. But her husband Chris loves her and is great to her. And they live in Naples half the year. And they just went down to Naples in November, and they drive through Atlanta on their way driving down to Naples. They live on a boat, and the other half of the year they live up in the suburbs of Chicago. And so we were praying for Laura, how would God work in her life. And in February, I was on a phone call with her, and she says, I joined a ladies' book club. I'm like, oh, great. She's a reader, she's got a lot of free time. And I said, she goes, you might know who we're reading. He's a really smart guy. His name's Tim Keller, and we're reading this book called Prodigal God. It's amazing. And these women just have invited me in and have embraced me. And so their whole weekly book club is on this book of Prodigal God. I'm like, okay, God, you're at work in this. My mom is the glue that kind of holds us all together, loves the whole spectrum of our whole family. Continue to pray for her and her witness to love others well in the process. Then my brother Mike is the one that came to Christ as a recovering alcoholic and has a very intentional lifestyle. He says, pray for me because he lives in Chicago and he's at these roundtable conversations a lot more than we are, so we come from Atlanta. But I share that story is just in the sense that it's a journey. Every one of my siblings is on a journey. Every one of the people in your life is a brother or a sister or a mother or a child or someone else. And they're connected to other people. And what the dandelions are spreading their seeds, multiple conversations, and someone had mentioned before, we don't know where it's going to land or who else is going to follow up and how God is orchestrating. But we have the privilege to really engage with the Imago Dei, the image of God, the bearers of Christ, the bearers of the image of God, here on this side of heaven, and trust God that He could use us to engage in people's
are faithful, 50% of America's comfortable, you know.
Yeah, we didn't drill down to those specific demographics, but we kind of took it as a compilation from the 24, the initial 24 as well as the 300. We found these people landing in these spots.
Yeah.
I think the interesting thing about our research, it's valid research in the quantity and the quality of time and the amount of people, but we're realizing we could double click on each one of these personas and go even more. The socioeconomic status, the geographical status, you have the whole immigrant influx, that opportunities are global strategy, but some of these principles I do think would apply globally, but we don't have exact demographics of that. I would say this is increasing.
This side.
This side is increasing rapidly. Okay, I'm going to pass it over to Tara Sher, who are going to help us get some feedback and then answer any other questions we might have.
Thanks, Tom, for sharing. If everyone will take out your phone or your computer or whatever you are most comfortable using, you have been sent a feedback survey. And we're going to ask you guys if you will take 5 to 7 minutes while you're sitting here with us and fill that out for us. It's really important that we understand what was valuable to you about this experience and how you'd like to, what you're taking away and how you'd like to move forward with this material, because we want to continue to serve you guys well. So we're going to give y'all a little bit of time. If you can find it, it either came from my email or SurveyMonkey. Has anybody found it yet? Tobin, who's it from?
It's your email.
All right, it's from Tara.Brady. Oh, it might be in spam, Cheryl said. All right. If anybody doesn't find it, will you raise your hand and let us know? Everybody's got it?